In today's video, we want to talk about a topic that is very prevalent across the software industry and can be extremely frustrating, and that is when a software engineer goes to an interview, feels like they were able to answer all their questions, get all the right answers, etc., but yet for whatever reason they still weren't offered the job. So there's several things that we want to talk about because there's lots of things going on behind the scenes that are happening. And as an interview candidate, we need to understand what's happening behind the scenes and how we're truly being evaluated in order to perform our best and show the company that we're interviewing for how we can really perform. Now, the first of the main concerns is around our thought process. Getting the question right is not enough. How did we present our actual solution? How did we, what holes were discovered when we were explaining a solution? So let's say that during an interview, you're asked to design out a certain functionality. Oh, I don't know, let's design a tic-tac-toe game, etc. So some of the first concerns might be around what kind of latency or problems will be introduced into the solution that was provided. Will the solution provided perform slowly, or will it bottleneck at every step along the way? Will it be understood by others? There's often, dozens of different ways to create a very simple tic-tac-toe game. But is it for any reason overly complicated? Will it be very hard for a team of engineers to work together on the solution that was provided? Oftentimes, in a team environment, it's more important for the team to work together and more cohesively than for the code to be written in a fast manner that just gets the job done really quickly. Of course, that depends on the actual company, but in most cases, solutions have to be handled in a way that others on the team are going to be understanding it as well. Can the solution be easily monitored? Maybe the solution that you presented technically works, but there's no point in the solution that can actually be monitored in terms of, logs or in terms of actions being performed, etc. And so we have no way as an operations team to understand the health of the current framework or solution. What about failure points? How many failure points were introduced? Was there a single point of failure where if a piece of hardware is unavailable for a certain amount of time, which is a very common outage, does the entire system go down? Or is the solution fault tolerant is kind of a better way to present it. Will the solution be able to work off of caches and off of, different things to enable it to continue working when certain pieces of the implementation as a whole are unavailable? Likewise, will the solution lock up? This is generally when you're interacting with your data store. Let's say you have a system that 1 million players are going to be interacting with at a given minute time frame or whatever. If they're all trying to access the exact same key in a MySQL database or in a NoSQL, data solution, there's going to be lock contention. There's going to be problems accessing that same piece of data. So were you able to distribute the critical information in a way that all your consumers can actually read it? Now, this actually brings us into the next piece of the concerns, and that was when you presented your solution, were you able to properly account for scale? This is one of the biggest problems that I often run into when interviewing candidates, and this is what really separates a junior engineer from a senior engineer. In short, a solution that accomplishes the goal is very often not good enough. And that is because we're a business. We want to grow our product. And generally, if we're hiring a team of users to maintain this product, that often means that we're already at a certain level of scale that has a large number of users. Let's just take 1 million users. how did your solution perform when it's put up to 1 million users? A perfect example of this is when we ask somebody to create a Who's Online style system. And they might easily say, oh, I'll just edit this file and put your username into it when you log in, etc. Well, the problem with that is when you have 1 million users going through this system, different users are going to overwrite other people's information. So that solution works when you only have a couple visitors a day, but when you have 1 million users, that solution is going to break down. Now, a way to evaluate an engineer on their ability to account for scale is by asking, were they able to ask questions during the interview process to figure out what kind of scale we're targeting? I actually really love it when interview candidates ask me questions about what kind of scale I should design for. In the Who's Online system, if I say to them, well, we only get about 10 users a day, so let's build a system for that. Then the candidate will often respond and say, well, for 10 users, I can do this, and I can do that very quickly, and that's the way to perform the function. And then I'll respond by saying, okay, now how would you design it for 1 million users? And the candidate would then respond, well, for 1 million users, this solution won't work because of XYZ. So I'd have to design it in this way using some kind of an aggregating system or some kind of a socket connection system, etc., etc. And we'd be able to go down a different type of discussion for small scale and large scale. And then through that discussion, me as a reviewer of this person's abilities, I can then evaluate whether or not their scale considerations were correct or incorrect. Did the user actually ask the right questions, and did he make assumptions that were correct? When I told the candidate that we have to design it for 1 million users, if the candidate responds and say, well, the locking file method that I provided earlier will still work for 1 million users, then that's an immediate red flag for me, because that tells me that the user does not understand proper scale and does not know how to actually implement it correctly. Now, the last major component through your interview process is really around your communication. I see this almost everywhere in the industry where users, candidates will say, oh yeah, I have great communication. I can communicate perfectly. But there's not really a lot of training on how to communicate. And it's not just being able to talk to somebody. It's a lot more in depth. So let's look at some of the things that could happen during an interview that might turn someone off from hiring that person for their company. The first one is whether or not a logical discussion actually occurred. When questions were asked, was the candidate able to provide an explanation to demonstrate that they actually do understand what they are talking about, or did they just give curt answers as if they had some things memorized from a textbook? This is often something that we see a lot more in recent university recruits versus users who have been in the industry for a long time. When you ask certain questions to university recruits, it feels like they're just repeating an exact textbook answer. However, someone who's been in the industry will say, well, I like it for this reason and I don't like it for that reason, and they'll be able to provide answers according to their experiences. Now, during those explanations, the interviewer might actually challenge some of the explanations provided. So then the next topic that comes up is, was the user able to actually defend their explanation? Again, this goes back to the university recruits. The university recruits, when you challenge their explanations, they often don't have enough experience and enough depth in their knowledge to actually understand why that challenge is occurring, and they have a harder time being able to defend it. Whereas someone who's been in the industry for a long time will be able to provide an answer such as, well, I know that this solution won't work because it didn't work for us when we tried to do it this way, and blah, 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 blah. And they can explain their solution very well. Now, of course, don't worry if you're a university recruit, because your interviewer knows the level that you're at, and these types of things help them to properly assess you and figure out where your knowledge pool is. Now, let's say that you did provide a solution and it just happened to be wrong, and the interviewer is telling you that it's wrong, etc. The next part that comes up is how was the engineer able to accept or take that his solution was just flat out wrong? I mean, I hate to break it to you, but engineers are not always correct. There are many times where you will present a framework, present a solution, and it will just be wrong. And there's really nothing wrong with that. That happens quite a bit. The important thing is, how did you take this negative feedback? Maybe you create a solution, create a framework, you take it to the CTO or the architect for your project, and the architect says, no, this won't work for this reason, etc. Are you able to productively work with that feedback, change your solutions, and account for the feedback that was provided? That is a critical skill needed out of any engineer who wants to grow. The second part of that then becomes, are you able to communicate with your non-technical coworkers? In a team environment, you will be interacting with artists, you will be interacting with product designers, you will be interacting with, production schedulers, you will be interacting with UI designers, etc. The majority of these people do not understand problems at scale. So you can't go to them and say, let's say that the UI designer presents a solution and you say, well, we can't implement that because, this socket-based software that we use only accepts, like this many connections at peak and blah, blah, blah. The UI designer will not understand that. So you have to explain the limitations that we have to work under in a non-technical manner in order to have that UI designer understand you and work with you. So are you able to speak in a non-technical manner to non-technical folks? So that basically wraps up this session. In summary, you might go to an interview and you might feel like you nailed all of the technical questions that were thrown at you. But the problem is that is only part of the interview experience. The interviewer wants to understand how you architect and how you approach problems. They want to understand your experience and skill levels when it comes to scaling solutions and products. And most importantly, they want to understand how you communicate not only with yourself and your teammates, but also with your, team's architects and CTOs, how you handle rejection, and how you communicate with non-technical folks on your team. Thank you for tuning in and joining us. Visit www.appdevelopertips.com for more help on this and similar subjects.